Most healthcare marketing leaders today aren't short on ideas. They have a lot of great ideas and they're experienced, they are capable, they're really good at working with their teams. But strategy still seems pretty hard, like harder than it should be.
Strategy is about pausing. I say pause for poise, like stopping for a second and really stepping back and having the big view and making choices not about what to do, but about how to do it, right? So strategy is a question of the how aligning to the why. All revenue is not created equal. We can increase volume, but increase and have a terrible payer mix and actually put ourselves in a worse financial position. Strategy also is as much about what we're not going to do as what we are going to do, right?
Absolutely.
Strategy is about saying no.
It's all about alignment, and alignment is a lot about those conversations. And we often feel that everybody should automatically be aligned after, a few words, but from my experience as well, it's just ongoing, making sure we're picturing the same destination. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. And today what I wanted to talk about was a subject that is more about the overall strategy in healthcare marketing. So most healthcare marketing leaders today aren't short on ideas. They have a lot of great ideas and they're experienced, they are capable, they're really good at working with their teams. But strategy still seems pretty hard, like harder than it should be. And I don't think it's because the thinking and those ideas are not there, but because most decisions are made with maybe a limited field of view, which is maybe just one team or one organization and a bunch of constraints that are maybe in people's minds or artificially created. And so today I want to unpack that a little bit and see, why does it feel so constraining when we're doing strategy? How come executing on it is difficult? And how does a leader expand their perspective within an organization, but also outside of those organizations? And I think the best person that I could find to speak about this in particular is Laila Waggoner, who has been around the block, right? And she describes herself as a chief dot connector. She has connected or interacts with providers, with vendors, with the community. She's also now on the board of SHISHMED. So I felt that she was the perfect person to give me an idea of why strategy is so hard these days. So Laila, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Brad. It's really great to be here, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Excellent. And so, like, I did a quick intro to you, but maybe you would like to explain to our viewers, like, who you are for those who don't already know.
Sure. Yeah. So as you mentioned, I've been around the block a few different times. After a very long career on both the agency side, spending a lot of time in strategic marketing agencies, working with healthcare clients across the spectrum from regional referral centers to community hospitals to managed care organizations to hospice organizations, a real wide variety of providers. I also then spent some time on the provider side in a marketing role as Great Lakes Group marketing director for Bon Secours Mercy Health, which was it's a large system, went through that integration process from Mercy Health to Bon Secours Mercy Health. So really bringing perspective, as you mentioned, from both sides of the desk, if you will, although I like to think of ourselves on the same side, just looking at things from, as you mentioned, different perspectives. So after about 35 plus years of being on both the agency and the client side, I started a couple of years ago, 2.5 years ago, Strategy for Hire. And so I really focus on providing that senior level strategic counsel to both providers, organizations, as well as those who serve those organizations, and really trying to, as you mentioned, connect the dots. I call myself the dot connector because when I really thought about what it is I bring to the table, the value that I can add, it is by having that perspective and looking at all those different dots, whether it's data points, whether it's types of organizations, whether it's teams, and finding ways to make those connections and really align on our goals.
And I mean, aligning on the goals and defining those goals at the end of the day is a bit of the essence of what strategy is. How do you, from your experience of having interacted with so many leaders in all these different fields and your own personal experience on the provider side, so what do you feel is making it so difficult today for leaders to be strategic, right? Is there a specific context now, or has it always been, right, throughout your entire career? Have you seen an evolution there? But what makes it so hard?
Yeah, I think we're at a particularly difficult time right now. I mean, healthcare marketing has always been complex. It's always been challenging. It's always been interesting. It's what's kept me engaged in it for so long, so many decades. But I do think we're at a particularly challenging time right now. And a lot of that is because the pressures that our organizations are under. The financial pressures have always been there. It's always been sort of this balance of how do we find the margin so that we can support our mission. But now the competitive challenges are there, the regulatory challenges are there, the reimbursement challenges are there. And often marketing is being asked to just move quickly. And frankly, strategy is about pausing. I say pause for poise, like stopping for a second and really stepping back and having the big view and making choices not about what to do, but about how to do it, right? So strategy is a question of the how aligning to the why. So you've got your goal and you've got your North Star of why you're doing it. And the strategy component is the setting up of how we're going to go about achieving those goals and then getting to the what. But I think right now we're in a situation where we're jumping to the what. We're jumping to the tactics. We're trying to measure them super quickly. We're trying to optimize constantly. We're being asked inevitably to do more with less. And I think strategy is about doing better, doing different, doing the things that, balancing long-term and the need for short-term results, but also keeping an eye on where are we headed? And again, back to the why. So I just think it's a really challenging role right now. I think also marketers, there used to be sort of a very clear definition of where marketing played. And I think that those borders, if you will, are being erased. I think we are blending with what traditionally might have been in different focus areas of the organization, but for sure it's related to experience. It's related to internal engagement, right? If our teams aren't engaged, we have a hard time delivering on the promises that marketing is putting out into the world. Everything is digital now. It isn't even a question of a separate organization. That's just needs to be integrated. Innovation, strategy, the strategy function, the IT function. So this is where connecting the dots and doing our work a little bit differently really begins to be very important because what's being asked of us is different than what it used to be.
Well, there's a lot to unpack in that question. I think that speaks to the fact that it's so difficult to be strategic, right? Because you were talking at the beginning a bit about the fact that how do we achieve those goals, right? We have these high level goals. The how part you were saying, right? Or what was it? Before getting into the tactics, right? Is that how you position it as how? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
And so what is the paths, right? To get
What
there to that goal? Because there's multiple, right?
That's exactly right. So just as an example, right? We'll often have a goal of increasing revenue, right? That's a very basic goal at any organization, whether it's healthcare or in any other space. But how we achieve that revenue matters, right? All revenue is not created equal. We can increase volume, but increase and have a terrible payer mix and actually put ourselves in a worse financial position. Right. So having a very good understanding of how our organizations make money, what our position is in the market. Are we a critical access organization? Are we a mission-driven organization? Are we a population health organization? All of these factors affect the how we go about and the why, right? Why we would continue, for example, to invest in a service line that does not actually generate margin for us because our community needs us to, because nobody else in the community is doing it, because it's part of our mission, for example. But it helps us to understand how we do that, how we balance, who we're bringing in to the organization from a revenue standpoint. How can we achieve the mix that we need to achieve in order to still maintain our viability? That all can affect the way we then go to market.
Yeah, so I think that's a great example of, okay, so there's that how do we get to that goal? Then you were talking about how there's the element of, we have all this data, we should be, improving on the numbers, right? But if we're not looking at the right numbers or not trying to move the needle of the right thing, there's a huge difference there. And as you were saying, like we're in a tough financial situation. I was on this panel on, proving ROI of marketing right last week or whatever. And I think there's a lot of, we have to kind of just show these numbers, shove them into the conversion rates, so like show it to executives so we can show that we're, doing our jobs. That's not connected with the strategy that falls apart, right? And I think that's the second part
Right.
of what you were saying. Am I correct?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And, one other point around strategy also is as much about what we're not going to do as what we are going to do, right?
Absolutely.
Strategy is about saying no
Yeah.
and having clarity about the framework by which you make those decisions, right? So what it really will do for you if to have that strategic process in place and that framework, first of all, it shows it sends a signal to leadership that their goals are your goals, right? That we're not off here doing something different than the rest of the organization. We are absolutely in sync and we are here to support it, which increases your chances of being seen as a strategic function as opposed to a cost center, for example.
Right.
The other thing is, though, that really we're looking for those points of differentiation, right? So for the strategy to be effective, we need to know who we are and who we aren't. We need to know what we will do and what we won't do. And so creating a strategic framework that helps you make those decisions can also then help guide where the resources go, how they get invested. And it really supports a marketing team, a strategic marketing team, in being able to, not just say no to all of the millions of requests that come in, but be clear about how those get prioritized and what kinds of resources we're able to use to support them. Demonstrating that deep understanding of, for example, how that service line operates, whether it's mostly referral driven or if it actually is consumer driven, and therefore what kind of a marketing program makes sense for that service line. Is the service line go to market ready? Is it actually operationally ready to accept those patients? What will the journey be like, right? What will that consumer to patient journey look like? And what kinds of messages will that send to the community? And what do we need to maybe fix or make sure is addressed before we go out and spend that money so that we're spending it to feed a positive experience out there? So, I mean, there's a lot in there, as you said, but I think these are all examples of why strategy and taking a strategic approach can really make a difference for a marketer.
And so I think I agree with you 100% in the fact that, you have to take this kind of step back. You have to think about, be coherent about why you're doing stuff. How can you say no to things? You were also talking a bit earlier about how, that what's that scope of what marketing encompasses, right? Because the digital experience now is expanding and those lines in the different departments are not always clear. And I think that's also part of that confusion. But what makes it, because what I've personally experienced and what I've seen is that taking that step back feels like we can never make that time, that we just have to kind of get to the numbers. We have to launch this new campaign. We have this pressure internally, somebody's shouting in a specific service line to, we have to book the availability that we have there. So how do we get to bring that energy and time and mindfulness that we have to bring to strategy? Like, how can a leader prioritize that as opposed to what seems like constant fires that have to be put out?
Yeah, and I think, this is not a flip the switch sort of a solution, right? And it depends very much on how marketing is already perceived within the organization. It depends on, where those points of influence are. So, frankly, when I talk with clients or anybody about how to connect the dots, for example, within your own organization. We talked about expanding perspective, right, within the organization. It really starts by building those intentional bridges internally and connecting with these different departments so that you begin to build some credibility. You listen, right? You seek to understand. You build those relationships. You are gathering the dots that will then need to be connected, right? So that you're not experiencing any sort of a gap in your understanding. And, doing that, not just when something's on fire, but as a matter of course, as a matter of standard operating procedure. And then using those structured frameworks. This is where having some tools in your toolbox can be kind of a great equalizer, right? So something like a service line go-to-market readiness assessment. It's a very sort of standardized approach. There are very fundamental questions that we're going to be asking, and having them recognize that I'm not doing this to throw up a wall or to slow us down. I'm doing it to ensure that whatever we end up doing is as effective, as cost efficient, as appropriate as possible, so that the revenue that we do generate is good revenue for the organization, or that we're balancing our different priorities appropriately. Because everybody knows we can't do everything, right? There's not the resources to do all the different things that everybody wants to do. So creating a framework for tiering service lines, for example, understanding what makes something a tier 1 service line versus a tier 2 versus a three, and what kinds of marketing, big M marketing support is appropriate given the answers to, these sorts of questions. It gives people a shared language, a shared lens, if you will. When we're all looking at things from our own perspectives, we see what we're under most pressure to deliver on. Right. But when we can connect those dots and we take a cohesive approach, particularly this is so true for, and it's absent often for newly formed systems or rapidly expanding systems, right?
Because there's a lot of that right now.
There's a lot of that, yeah. And, healthcare, very few systems out there were built and designed as systems. They're a collection of, they've been brought together, and each of them grew up with their own structure and culture and approach, and have thought of themselves as these independent entities, and now to be thinking systematically across multiple organizations around how do we position that way, because we're not all executing our own strategies. We typically will have to have a system level strategy and then think about where do we fit within that. That's true of service lines. That's true of facilities, locations, kind of all of it.
And so we're talking about how, you're talking a bit about the frameworks of being able to frame each decision and not have to, start from scratch every time you have to decide about something. And you're also talking about connecting with other people in other departments. And so in that second part of the equation, because I think both of these things at the end of the day helps leaders be strategic. And also from my perspective, being strategic is also about clarity, to be clear to the team. This is what we want. This is not what we want. CMOs or directors are going to feel that they're repeating themselves all the time, but that's a good thing, right? Because we're constant and we're coherent with the plan and the strategy. But how do we, how does an executive or someone in the marketing department who's a leader, how do they go about to connect with those other departments? There are, committee meetings where all the different department heads are going to be there, but they're more kind of straight to the point and everybody has their own time to speak. So how do we go about to socialize internally or to, get the time to develop those ideas with the different members of other departments to be able to make sure that we're all aligned on the strategy and we're doing the same thing at the same time? Do you have any tips on that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different approaches, right? There's certainly the informal approach, right? Of identifying, kind of doing almost like a mapping exercise of who needs to know, who do we need to have alignment with, who has influence over this particular initiative, who will have a perspective that is important to hear from before we start. So it's first about identifying those stakeholders. But for example, let's imagine there's not necessarily a particular initiative that you're focused on. You can still figure out who do I need to know in these different groups and reach out and say, hey, could we meet for coffee? Could we meet for lunch? Just get to know them. I want to learn about you and your role and what keeps you up at night and what, and somebody might think, well, I just don't have time for that. And it's like, well, yes, and you will benefit from it, right? You're going to learn something. You're going to make an ally, hopefully. When you need certain kinds of data that you don't normally have access to, now you have a friend you can ask for,
Right. It's kind of like an investment, right? Like
it's an
you're going to spend
investment.
that time up front, but it's going to make things so much easier and frictionless or,
Yeah,
you
or
know,
at least reduce the friction, right?
yeah,
There's
yeah.
there's a little bit of something there. There's a basis for the relationship. I mean, that's certainly, that's just kind of part of the mix. But I think when there's an initiative in particular, it's a great equalizer and informative process to ask those different stakeholders from your point of view, what is the problem that we're solving, right? Because I think so often an initiative is started and everybody has their own idea of what problem we're solving, but nobody's gained alignment on that.
Right. There's a lot of
And
assumptions.
a lot of assumptions get made. Either what problem are we solving or what does good look like? How, what does success look like? And then agreeing that this is how we will measure success. I talk a lot, I use the analogy of a trip, right? Planning a trip. And if I'm planning a trip for a group and we all say, we did a little quick survey and everybody agrees, you know what, we want to go south. We want to escape this long winter that we're having, especially where I am in northern Michigan, you're up in Canada.
Right.
We need to go south. We need to go somewhere warm. Let's call it that. Somewhere
100%.
warm.
Yep.
Well, your idea of something somewhere warm and my idea of somewhere warm might be
Yep.
very different. How we're going to get there, like I want to get there as fast as possible, and you were really hoping for a nice, leisurely, scenic route.
Right.
I'm planning a trip where we're flying and we're sparing no expense and we're staying on the beach and we're hanging out, and you're thinking about this scenic tour where we're stopping to see all the sights along the way. We have very different pictures in our heads. And guess what? We're both going to be disappointed if neither one ends up being true and we actually end up in a warm place, which we all said that that's what we wanted,
Yeah.
but it's not at all the picture that we had. So it's getting at that picture in people's heads and defining things and making sure we have a shared language and a shared perspective and a shared goal, because now we're all in it, right? We have all contributed to it, and it can't just be marketing's off doing that thing. It has no connection to what I do. Like, no. That is not, what we're doing. And marketing is not to be brought in at the last minute
Oh, man. Yeah.
to make it pretty or, promote it. Like, let's talk about what the it is, right? As much as then it will make sense to understand what we're promoting or why we're doing it in the first place. Or, you know what? We're doing the wrong thing. Like being willing to just ask the questions of like, we're promoting something, but that's not what's needed. What actually is needed is we need some operational fixes, or, this is a referral-based business. Why are we promoting it on a billboard? Or why are we, spending dollars
Right.
trying to get consumers to think about a service line that they're never going to be able to choose themselves? Or, just basics like that, I think, are sometimes missed.
Yeah, I'm 100% in agreement with the fact that you're saying it's all about alignment, and alignment is a lot about those conversations. And we often feel that everybody should automatically be aligned after a few words, but from my experience as well, it's just ongoing, making sure we're picturing the same destination. How are we going to get there? And I often, just in my work, as we do a lot of creating websites, maintaining evolving existing, hospital and system websites. And I often talk about it as a trip as well. Like, hey, we have to make sure we have the same destination in mind. But then that journey is also going to evolve as we go, right? And so, oh, you know what? We discovered there's a festival like at this town that we're going through. Like maybe we should stay an extra night, kind of a thing. And then how does that fit with the overall goal? What's that going to be the impact on the rest of the project that we're working on? And that conversation has to be ongoing, because we can't just say, yeah, well, after the fact, be disappointed that it's not exactly as I pictured it in my head, because life changes as well, right?
Yeah, I think that's so true, Brett. And, the thing we haven't talked a lot about, but I do think is a really important component of marketing's role in strategy, is the voice of the consumer, right? Because they're the ones who we can't always just ask. And there's a lot of assumptions. Talk about assumptions. There's a lot of assumptions that get made. Thinking about ways to bring that voice of the consumer into that decision process. I think that's our responsibility fundamentally as
Understood.
marketers, is to
Mhm.
keep people at the center of what it is we're trying to accomplish, and having that representation there, whether that's through specific custom research, which is everybody's dream, is to be able to do the custom research to inform this specific initiative that you're under. But even if you can't do that, you still have a responsibility to say, well, what can we learn? How else can we learn this? How can we gather, that input and turn the data, whatever data points we have, into insights that then can be translated into strategies. And then we get to the tactics and the creative and the execution piece that is informed by all of these different inputs.
And so we're talking about adding that point of view of the patient, and I think that marketing should be, as you say, that main consumer champion or patient champion, because they understand how they get to that, what they're expecting, what promise we're trying to deliver on, and then obviously there's sometimes a disconnect between the operations and the marketing, because once an appointment has been booked, there's a bit less conversation or transmissibility of that information, depending on which system we're talking about. And everybody has their different specific roles. But that's kind of one way to kind of look at what's going on outside. This is the patient. He's not a member of our organization, but we're there to serve the patient, and this is their needs, their wants, their
Mhm.
worries, etc. And so
Yeah.
that's one way of looking outside. And the other way that I know that we'd had talked about in our previous calls is about because we talked about internally how that leader is going to connect with the other elements of leadership, be it IT or operations or clinical leaders. How does that still is confined to your own system, your own locality, your own experience, and you're a very strong vocally proponent of you should get involved in the larger community, right? The nationwide, the larger, maybe multi-county or multi-state region. And so,
Yeah.
how does a marketing leader leverage a community that goes beyond their own institution?
I'm so glad you brought that up, Brad, because I do think I am an absolute champion of and beneficiary of the networks and the community and the intelligence and the mentorship that comes from engaging with folks who are like-minded, but who come with different perspectives and different experiences. And so I think there's a number of ways that people can do this in a way that's really beneficial. For sure, organizations like SHSMD, right? The Society of Healthcare Strategy and Market Development is the marketing arm of the American Hospital Association and offers all sorts of opportunities. For sure, there's conference, right, which is generally in the fall. It's a great opportunity to connect with folks and to do a lot of learning and education, but there's ongoing year-round education opportunities. You mentioned I do serve on the advisory board of SHSMD, but the way I got engaged with SHSMD and really connected was both at the national level at conference and through the education programs and the online communities where you can exchange questions and answers and give each other advice. But then I got involved in the mentoring program, which I just loved having that opportunity to mentor. I learn as much from my mentees as they do from me, I think. But also the regional conferences, those smaller groups tend to bring together people who are a little more closely connected, smaller settings, so you're really able to engage, and there's education components, there's networking components, but there's a true sense of community that extends far beyond a given conference or webinar or member meetup or whatever the venue or the particular event is. This is one of the most generous and um, kind industry communities that I've ever been involved with. And I've worked in healthcare for 40 years, but I've also worked in other industries.
Right.
And they all have their own sense of community, but the healthcare marketers are really like, when you find your people, you are so buoyed by the support that we give each other, because we are all sort of it's for sure the same ocean, right? We may not be all in the same boat, but we're for sure in the same ocean, and that's really great. So it's so good to be able to text those folks or call them jump on a Zoom, pressure test your ideas, have them be a sanity check on your assumptions. Ask them what worked for you. Like even the ability to come back to your leadership and say, I know we don't have the budget to go do a big study, but I benchmarked against several other organizations who have done this. And here's what the learnings were that they were able to tell us so that we maybe make our own mistakes, but we're not going to make the mistakes that they made, right? Like that's a huge plus to be able to say, I'm checking, I'm researching, I'm finding out who's out there and what they've done and what have they tried, what do they wish they had known before they started, what would they recommend, sharing, like asking them, what am I not seeing? What, show them what you're thinking and say, pick it apart, give me feedback. People are so kind and generous, they're willing to do that sort of feedback loop.
My own experience, confirms what you're saying. It's such a welcoming community. I think there's probably two structural reasons I feel for that. One is, I think at the end of the day, most people who work in healthcare are mission driven, right? At a certain point where it's there to provide care for others, right? And so there's an element of community there. And I think the other one is that it's interesting. It's similar to experiences that I've had working with the higher ed community as well, where there's a bit less competition, right? Because each system or hospital usually has its own area or region where they're very strong. Now, I'm not talking about the national ones, but usually someone who's out of California can easily share notes with someone out of Wisconsin or from, Maine, because they're not going to be directly competing. And so they can share best practices and what they've done and everything, because it's not going to be turned against them right at the end of the day. And there's that collegiality as well. So I think those elements add to the fact that this is even more welcoming and up in as a community.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I think the more you reach out to folks, it's like you get the benefit of their experience in addition to your own. Like it amplifies your perspective and it helps you build that pattern recognition faster in many ways, right? You see the recurring dynamics. It'll make you more confident about, the recommendations that you're taking to your own leadership to say, I know that this worked in, these other situations. And we can put our efforts less toward, solving the same problem and into like the actual execution. Like we don't all have to come up with these things ourselves. It's okay to borrow, to use something as a springboard. Not everything has to be 100% original from a how to solve this kind of a scenario. Like there's too much to be done, frankly.
Right.
And back to your question about the pressures, the time pressures, it's like, talk to me about a strategy, given, particularly if you can find similarly oriented, systems out there who like share, and yes, we all share the value of, caring for our communities, but some organizations are positioned, differently. Academic medical centers may want to turn to other academic medical centers to say, how have you approached this particular, because we're similarly situated or we're similarly, rural health organizations may want to compare notes with other rural health organizations, that sort of a thing. And we're all there to help each other. And so SHSMD for sure, but there are many, other opportunities. HMPS is another wonderful conference. HCIC is another wonderful conference opportunity to connect with folks, and so much good learning that goes on. Really
How do you
encourage. And if they don't know where to go, reach out. I'm happy to point you in those directions.
Absolutely, right? But what is the so yes, you can go to these different events, you can sign up to these different communities. What's from your perspective or your experience the best way to get the best out of them? I think my default response would be, you get as much as you put in, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But where do you think would be the best places to put it in? Is it to kind of break the ice at an event and talk to someone and ask them about their troubles? Is it to get more involved in a certain element of the community? What would you recommend for people to really get the most value out of contributing to a community?
Yeah. So I think, like most good strategists, I'll answer your question with a question, which is, I think it's great this is where the pause for Poise really can make sense, right? As opposed to just booking your trip and showing up and having that be the first time you've really looked at the agenda or looked at the exhibitor list or looked at, what the sessions are about, like ask yourself, what are the big things that I'm struggling with? What are the challenges that I'm facing? Who might I be able to connect with when I'm there? I'm going to be moderating a panel discussion coming up at the Forum for Healthcare Strategists HMPS conference in Salt Lake City. And the topic of that session is build versus buy, right? So really, really thinking about what makes sense to do internally and what makes sense to outsource.
Right.
And remember, you're at a conference where there's all sorts of solutions providers who are really skilled at their particular area. So spend a little minute, thinking ahead of time, what do I need? Where do I need support? What do I want to know about these folks? Plan ahead to go and figure out, hey, I might need some support in this particular area. Who are the three, folks in the exhibit hall that I really want to go and meet? And what do I want to know from them? What do I want to learn from them? Right. So
it kind of feels to me like what you're saying is, in a nutshell, be strategic, right?
Be strategic, and it's really about taking a second to say, what am I trying to accomplish? What's my goal? And if it is like, I want to meet other people who are in a similar role at a similar institution. Okay, great. Now you know where to spend your energy. And that's a little bit of time ahead of time on the app that's going to show up on your phone. Register for it. Look at people's profiles. Send them a note ahead of time saying, can we meet for coffee? Yes, it all takes a little bit of time, but then you get so much more out of it because you've had that second to plan ahead.
And so we've talked about in this conversation about how being strategic can be more difficult, where the roles are expanding. There's a lot of stuff. How do we take that step back? We talked about internally connecting with different stakeholders and building those relationships to align. We talked about getting help from community. So let's say all those things are helping us to become more strategic. And so being more strategic in a sense is being able to make better decisions faster, have a better, I guess, quote unquote, judgment or discernment on where we should focus. What does that look like in practice, right? Do you have an example of an organization or an individual that you've worked with where, hey, you know what, after having made a couple of these changes, now they're so much more focused, they're delivering better value. Like, do you have a concrete example of that?
I think the best example might be instituting some of these frameworks that we've talked about and these processes so that on an ongoing basis, the team is turning to these tools. They're using them regularly. It's helping to manage expectations from the service line and clinical leaders so that this is not unexpected, that they're going to be asked questions around operational readiness and that sort of thing. And it's become a much smoother process as a result because it's not a surprise. It doesn't feel like they're being singled out or being said no to. They're recognizing the value in being a participant in the process and helping to shape the strategy, and the campaigns that have been implemented are more on target as a result. We've engaged the service line and operational leaders in developing the value propositions, for example, for those service lines. They know that they have an opportunity to have a voice, and then they see themselves and their teams reflected in the campaigns, and they recognize their part in delivering on the promise. We talked about that early on, right? So they don't see marketing as a thing over there. It's just part of the much bigger picture, and it's one piece of the puzzle, and they have a role to play as well. And it's I think elevating the role of marketing within the organization as a result.
Right. Yeah, and I've seen, like, from my own experience working with different marketing teams, like I can tell a team that's a bit more strategic in their approach. They're a bit more patient. They have a better idea of the goals they want to achieve. It doesn't really necessarily mean they know the exact tactics of how to get there, but they understand what should be prioritized. We don't have that kind of shiny object syndrome where, like, every 2-3 months it's like, hey, well, we should do this now. Hey, let's do this now, kind of thing. It's like, no, let's stay the course because this is what's best for the organization. And so I do feel on the overall marketing operations, right? It's also, it has a calming effect in a sense for the
Hmm.
overall team that they know what they're going to be working on, why they're working on it, and how it connects with the overall organization's goals. So there is this kind of maybe less tangible, less measurable element, but I can feel it in the day to day as well when I'm working with a more strategic client from
Yeah.
my perspective.
Yeah.
So
That's great.
as we kind of come to the close here, what would be your recommendation for someone who is a marketing leader in a healthcare organization and they just wish they could be more strategic. They just don't seem to find the time. It's not working, or
Hmm.
it's always something they have to postpone. What would be your recommendations to say, well, hey, these little baby steps could be
Yep.
things that if you implemented or just try it out like next week or something,
Yeah.
what would you say is the best kind of small step one can take?
Yeah, and I think that that's it's a great way to think of it, Brad, because it can be intimidating and it can be overwhelming, and you can feel as though like, well, I can't. How do I get there, right? So I
Right.
think there's a few things that people can do to take those small steps, right? One is, and this might feel weird at first, but to block what I call thinking and connecting time on your calendar, and have a meeting with yourself, right? Like, don't think that you're just going to squeeze it in 15-minute increments, but give yourself, whether it's, a half hour a week to start with, right?
Right.
Either at the beginning of the week or at the end of the week, to just give yourself, and it's not, it's just as important a meeting as anything else. It shouldn't get blocked over when somebody calls, but it gives you time to pause, to look ahead or to reflect back, and to maybe one of the things that you do is at least one of those a month is a connecting time, right? Where you have reached out to somebody to do a Zoom call to introduce yourself or to get to know them about a thing that you're wanting to do. Just start to
That
build
is
it
super.
into your
I love
schedule.
that. I personally, because I'm CEO, right, of my own organization, and I do have that meeting with myself. I have like a 1 hour block meeting because I feel that half an hour is too short. Whereas I kind
Yep.
of ramp up into it and then
Yeah.
the time's over.
The
And I
time is
feel
over.
to have that mind space to be
Yeah.
strategic, you need to kind of ramp into it. It takes, for me at least, about 20 to 25 minutes. Then I'm really in that zone for the
Yeah.
next potentially hour and a half after that, depending on how long I have. And
Yeah.
then, it can go
Ideally,
straight.
it would be an hour, but I just know what those schedules look like
Yeah,
on our,
exactly.
our
Right. So
clients'
start somewhere,
calendars.
right? Yeah. Yeah.
Start small, right? Like
Yeah.
it's just like anything else. You don't go straight from couch to marathon, right? It's
Yeah.
called couch to
Absolutely.
5K because you're just taking, some steps to make progress. I think another thing that people can do is just pick out just a few people, you could start either inside your organization or externally that you think of as your go-to folks that you can turn to bounce ideas off of, whether you call it, I've heard it called your own personal board. I call it a kitchen cabinet. That's not my term, but, it's like that group of people, strategy council, whatever you want to think of, but people who you can turn to bounce ideas off of. Even if it starts with one, a mentor or somebody who you can go out to. And then, starting to think about, use that thinking time to think about tools that would be helpful, and even you can use sometimes that time to go find those tools, right? Like
That's true. Yeah.
sometimes it's like, is there a framework that I could be using? Is there a checklist? I'm going to go spend a half an hour searching through the Shishmid education opportunities to even know what's available to me or to
Right.
my team, like, gosh, I didn't even know that was out there. But finding those tools that others have used or that others are recommending that might be a helpful step. I think, some of those little steps can really start to make a big difference. So,
And so we got those three things we should do, but in the spirit of strategy, right? What's one thing a marketing leader should say no to, right?
you should say no when you can't identify, or you should at least say not right now. Give
Okay.
yourself time to consider it, or not yet. I think it's okay to say, I need to think about that a little bit more, or I
Mm,
need to go research that a little bit more. I think as marketers, we are often people pleasers. We are
mm,
often get it done people. We are people that people have always counted on, to execute. And it's easy to slip into that mode of saying, yes, we're going to find a way to do that.
Right.
And to be willing to just say, not no, but I need to think about that a little bit more. I want to give you a thoughtful response. I would like
I
to
think
look into this a little
we
bit
don't
more.
give us enough of that ourselves enough of that bandwidth. So I think we do. I agree that we need to give ourselves that permission to say, you know what, I'll think about it and get back to you later. And from my own experience, when you take the time to think about something, your decision is usually much better than if you're trying to make it, directly on the spot. On top of if you don't have that framework, right, to guide you to
Yeah.
make those right decisions.
Yeah.
So.
Yep.
Laila, this was really interesting and valuable. And I think we brought it to another level, right? We weren't so much in the tactics. And I think it's really important for us to be able to, because I feel like sometimes, marketers are always swimming and swimming, and we have to kind of get our head out of the water and kind of breathe a bit, right? And make sure that we're swimming in the right direction. So I think this conversation was really helpful in that sense. And hopefully we'll have another one in the future.
That sounds great, Brad. Thank you so much. It was a really fun conversation.
Thank you.
All right. We'll see you soon.